All right, folks, welcome to the release party for Of This World from Benjamin Kessler. We are so excited. I am MJ Malpiedi from Game Over Books. I will be your host and MC for tonight. So I really want to get right into it, and I want to be blasted off into the crazy world of Ben's stories because they are freaking phenomenal. So I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm going to give Ben a little intro here. Actually, let me bring Benji up on the screen here. Oh, let me add myself back. And Benjamin Kessler's work appears in Bellevue Literary Review, Diagram, Entropy, Hobart, and Pinhead Chapel, among others. Raised in northern Colorado, he now lives, writes, and frequently thrifts in Portland, Oregon. Folks, please give some love in the chat. Benjamin, now please.
Thank you, MJ. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Game Over Books, for giving a wonderful platform to my book and such incredible support. I know it was probably a labor of love at certain points, but I could not be more thrilled with the final product. And I've been chuffed to bits all day just thinking about it. I am going to read a little bit from the book. It's beautiful. If you have not picked up a copy, it has this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful cover, and I want to thank Frankie Martin for this wonderful, wonderful cover front and back. It's so amazing. I love sharing the art for this. And I am going to read the titular story. It's the story that opens the collection. It is fittingly called Of This World. And I hope you enjoy it. I hope it makes you think of aliens and not of mortality. It'll probably make you think of both. This is Of This World. This originally appeared at Pinhead Chapel, by the way. Exhibit Hall B has really good stuff, Trexus tells me. Let's not rush. He checks and rechecks that the pins on his lanyard are oriented to his specification, then turns to me for approval. I nod, not knowing what correct looks like, and we push through into the mercifully air-conditioned Tucson Convention Center. He pulls a map from his back pocket and traces a path through the building with his finger. I'm supposed to be paying attention, but instead I stare absent-mindedly at a replica flying saucer hanging from the ceiling. It's the classic pie plate shape in diodes flash intermittent green and purple behind clouded plastic portholes. That's the route, Trexus says, stuffing the map away. I tell him it sounds good, and then he leaves to use the restroom. After a moment, my phone pings. Don't start without me, he texts, seemingly from inside a bathroom stall. I won't, I reply. If I did, I think his heart would break. Trexus's real name is Matthew, but at Unidenticon, you can have whatever you want displayed on your name badge. Trexus is his handle on several of the more prominent UFO sighting forums. I've stashed my name badge away in my pants pocket where it simply reads guest. Trexus and I have been married for 3 years, but this is the first time I have accompanied him to anything like this. You'd come with me, really. When I asked to go, he had just picked me up from a shift at the Golden Rose, where I still occasionally danced. He'd gotten so excited by the idea that I thought we might speed off unexpectedly into someone's front yard. The con doesn't look as I imagined it would. There's no men wearing plastic gray alien masks, no long-bearded conspiracy truther types. Each person I see filter in and out of the exhibit halls resembles somebody's dad, all tucked in t-shirts and phones clipped to their belts. Trexus returns, and I can tell he's anxious to get going, so we walk the length of the convention center quickly. He's nearly running and loses a flip-flop, which he has to come back to retrieve. We follow signs to Roswell, the largest of the exhibit halls. The space explodes beyond the grouping of doors. 5 rows of double-sided booths extend to the far wall, and an enormous lighted stage sits empty behind them. Long green banners hang from the ceiling. The smell is not yet unpleasant. The flow of eager convention goers parts and reforms around me like I'm a stone lodged in rushing water. Trexus places his hand on the small of my back and smiles. And this is just one of 3. He guides me down a path flanked on both sides by dedicated hobbyists selling all manner of things designed to enhance the alien hunting experience. Guidebooks and divining crystals and high-powered telescopes. A man in an X-Files button-up will sketch you for $10, replacing your head with that of the extraterrestrial of your choice. Trexus stops at a stand and inquires about the price of a star chart. While he haggles, I wander to an adjoining table and thoughtlessly pick up a small glass jar filled with metal shavings. Authentic alien material, the booth's owner says. He is clean-shaven, with gray hair and a part, and has luminous teeth. He looks like a doctor whose ad you might see on a bus bench. What is it? Not sure. Nothing on this planet really compares. When I was taken aboard the mothership and the beings implanted inside me, he hasn't stopped smiling. After returning, I dug it out with a knife. These were inside you? I placed the jar back onto the tablecloth and wiped my hands down the front of my jeans. Indeed, they were. They're a bargain at $15, too. I tell him I'll think about it and then find Trexus. The star chart has been rolled and placed into a cardboard tube, which he excitedly rolls between his hands. Not too expensive, I hope, I say. Oh no, guy didn't know what he had. Got it for a song. I cringe at the thought of Trexus hanging it in our living room, but say nothing. Matthew hadn't been interested in extraterrestrials when we first met. He liked sci-fi, we both did, but nothing so extreme. We'd found one another at a shared friend's holiday party and bonded over a mutual dislike of the classic Christmas music piping out of the stereo. He was a chemical engineer, and I was still camming, which he didn't think was strange. We spent the entire evening seated near the party host's sleeping cat, talking about whether or not the new Star Wars was any good. Things progressed, as you might expect, and a year later we were married. I stopped camming in favor of dancing, and Matthew began using his PhD to teach adjunct at the college. We were happily in love every day. And then Matthew's mother died. The car she'd been driving collided with a road sign, and her body was found 20 feet away on the gravel shoulder. The police said that after the crash, it appeared as though she'd unbuckled her seatbelt, left the vehicle, and walked some distance before collapsing. The coroners listed her cause of death as internal bleeding, common in automobile accidents. Her organs had been pulverized, but otherwise there wasn't a scratch on her. The entire situation seemed capricious and random, a freak accident. Matthew's personality doesn't account for randomness. As such, he spent the better part of 6 months trying to piece things together. Had she been drinking? The toxicology report said no. Had she been speeding? Not that the police could tell. Had she been sick? A checkup 1 month prior pointed to only a routine calcium deficiency. After he ran out of crime scene documents to request from the city, I thought he'd given up, or perhaps accepted that it was something we could never know fully. But then he asked me over dinner one night if perhaps she could have been abducted by aliens. What? Of course not, I replied. That's absurd. There's credible reports online of people being taken from their vehicles. What do you mean credible? I swirled red wine around my glass. There's dash cam footage. My response was swirling. You've seen it? No, but it exists. He squirmed a bit in his seat. Warmth rushed to my face, and I felt ashamed for minimizing him. Maybe, I said, shrugging. After that night, his fascination grew beyond a momentary distraction from grief. He began to special order books online, to research locations of possible sightings on his phone. He joined a special forum where people recounted their abduction experiences. I would have intervened, but his mood was improving. He was excited to go out again to restaurants or to see our friends. We were having regular sex for the first time in nearly a year. He'd even agreed to take on extra classes at the college. Though in exchange for all this happiness, I sat and watched Matthew become obsessed. Is this still about what happened? I would ask. Every time he would say no, he was simply interested now, and he said it enough times that I started to believe him. Then he would tell me that he was going camping over the weekend, which I knew was code for hunting UFOs. Everyone has hobbies, and I told myself that this wasn't all that different from bird watching. Part of me believed he would grow out of it, but instead, here we are, standing in front of an overflowing pebbled garbage can while Trexus introduces me to some of his online friends at an alien convention 1,000 miles from home. His friends are nice enough, almost stamped out versions of Trexus himself down to the color and length of their hair, the kind of glasses they sport. We make small talk about the heat, about which of us has the seediest motel room, and then I'm on the outside as they talk about a panel earlier that morning concerning extraterrestrial sightings in classical antiquity. I tell Trexus I'm going to buy a bottle of water and that I will meet back up with him in half an hour. He smiles back at me, and I peck him on the cheek. On the way out of the hallway, petitions are shoved into my hands by organizations with names like Humans for Mutual UFO Studies and the Identifiers. They are campaigning to get some new law passed that has to do with federal record keeping. With this legislation, I am told, they can start getting to the truth. They say I'd be helping a lot, so I sign everything that's put in front of me. I tell myself that I'm doing this for Matthew. Once I'm in the hallway, I fall into a padded armchair and the tiredness pools up in my calves. I'm already exhausted. I scroll through Instagram and like photos of girlfriends out enjoying mixed drinks in the calm Seattle springtime. At the behest of my father-in-law, Matthew and I saw a grief counselor, though only briefly. After the first few visits, Matthew refused to go anymore. He was dealing with it just fine on his own, he said. It's normal for people who experience unexpected tragedy to look for an explanation, the counselor told me. They need something to blame. I sometimes worry, however irrational it may be, that Trexus will actually discover tangible evidence that aliens abducted his mother. His answer will finally be found. What does life after that even look like? Tonight, the entire convention will move to a dry lake bed out in the desert south of the city, where there have been many purported alien sightings. Trexus assures me that although he hasn't personally witnessed a spacecraft yet, this year he has a good feeling. I'm still wasting time on my phone when he slides into the chair beside mine. Hey, good looking. Come here often? He has acquired various trinkets, picked carefully from intriguing stalls. Something that looks like a Geiger counter sticks out from his official Unidentified tote bag. Are you having a good time? He asks. Of course. You can always go back to the room. I know this is a lot. It's fine, really. I place my hand on his arm and his face lights up in a way that makes me beam in return. Okay, good. The guys and I are going back to the hotel and use the pool. Do you want to come? I tell him I do, and then, like a happy dog, he pulls me through the convention center to our rental car. We stop along the way for roadside tacos and then proceed through the suffocating downtown traffic. I fall in and out of a nap while Trexus listens to NPR. Matthew is, in all other aspects of life, exceptionally mild-mannered. He likes to hike and read mystery novels and chat with work friends while shooting zombies on PlayStation. The alien-centric moments of his life don't amount to much when placed end-to-end. However, in these moments, the moments Matthew becomes Trexus, his focus is pointed in a way that forces everything else into the background. Nothing else exists, not me, not our marriage, not even his own well-being. I get the sense that on this trip, he is making a serious attempt to be on his best behavior. On our last day here, he said we could do anything I wanted. No aliens, I asked. None. We're going to tour historic missions around the city. It was one of the more terrestrial things I could think of. Back in our room, we change into swimsuits and then wait in the shade beside the pool. There are a lot of con attendees staying at our hotel, and the water is already full. A space opens up in the 3-foot zone, and Trexus and I wade in to fight the heat slowly cooking our bodies. From our spot along the edge, I can reach out and touch a sharp yucca plant covered in ants. Trexus wraps his arm around my waist and pulls us together at the hip. What do you think of the convention? Trexus asks. It's nice. In the parking lot, a delicate bird runs from shade to shade, kicking up gravel. You hate it. No, really, it's fun. Trexus waves at his friends who have just arrived and are shoving past bodies to come towards us. I rub Trexus's back and hoist myself up out of the pool, planting myself in a vinyl deck chair so that they can talk about all manner of otherworldly things. Sometimes, when Matthew thinks I am asleep, I can hear him speaking to someone. It's like he's praying. He asks if he is doing all right. He asks if he is being a good person. He sometimes asks questions he knows can't be answered. This person isn't in the room. They might not even be on Earth, but he speaks to them, sotto voce, like the words are at the very tip of his fingers. Sometimes hearing him talk like this makes me start to cry, and often I hope to fall asleep before he starts. I attempt to tan for a few moments until the water has dried off my skin and I can feel myself begin to burn. I walk over to Trexus, my soul's aflame on the hot concrete, and let him know that I will be up in the room. He nods and says okay, then kisses me. His lips taste like chlorine and honey lemon lip balm. Trexis isn't satisfied with our placement. We're too far from the landing site. The ground beneath our blanket is uneven. Some people near us have brought their dog, and won't they please shut it up for just one goddamn second? Do you want to move? I ask. We arrived late to the lake bed, and the viewing spots up near the landing site were all taken. After the pool, we'd both fallen asleep in the hotel, a full person's width between us on the bed to keep from sticking to one another. We'd easily slept through the alarm. No, it's fine. He sits in a heap and takes a picture of the night sky with his phone. You can't see much on account of the nearby Tucson smog and light pollution, but the brightest stars are visible. Trexis points them out to me, holding my hand in his and guiding it like a professor's pointer. Everyone from the con is here. Pop-up stands selling water and glow sticks are lined up beside a wall of plastic portable toilets. People are hula hooping, their bodies ringed with LEDs spinning rainbows in the night. Near the landing site, which is a large oval-shaped disc dug into the parched ground, a series of powerful spotlights are angled up into the sky. It is a signal, I am told, for our potential visitors. And there are so many cacti. Surrounding the lake bed in a giant ring, row upon row of the enormous long-armed plants throw their shadows against the mesas in the distance. Their limbs are like hands pointing upward, instructing. Look, they seem to say, or you might miss it. Trexis and I lay back together on the blanket and listened to the faint sound of folk guitar from a few spots over. It's finally possible to be comfortable now that the sun is down. Checking my face in the mirror before we left for the lake bed revealed a deep sunburn on my neck and ears. My manager at the club isn't going to be happy when he sees my crimson shoulders. Peeling skin isn't sexy. So what happens? I asked. The hope is that some kind of craft will appear. When? Impossible to tell. My face screws up at the thought of staying out here until morning, and I tell Trexis that if there's nothing by midnight, we're going back to the hotel. I'm sure Trexis knows this by now, but I don't believe in aliens. I don't believe in flying saucers. I don't believe that his mother was abducted and deposited back on Earth simply to die. To his credit, Trexis doesn't try to convince me. Instead, he tells me about the things he learns in the same way other people recount the plots of their favorite books or movies. Did I know that one possible explanation for D.B. Cooper's disappearance was that he was taken away by a tractor beam during his fall? No, I did not. Please go on. An hour passes within the low murmur of surrounding conversation, or maybe it's 10 minutes, perhaps less than that. I love this. It could happen tonight. I'd remember it for the rest of my life. Trexis is sitting up, stripping the needles from a shrubby plant through his fingers. I'm not sure he's talking to me, and I close my eyes. This is it, as close as I'll get. I hear him pluck another stem from the shrub. I know it's not now or nothing, but I just want to know. I don't see why I've had to wait so long. He speaks softly under his breath, and I can't be sure if he's talking to me or to something beyond us, something spread against the curtain of darkness. Matthew says, I love you. Everyone is suddenly up and moving. Trexis shakes my shoulders. It's happening, he tells me. He takes out his phone and, holding it out in front of him to capture video, runs off towards the array of spotlights. A noise, droning like a truck moving along the highway, rattles the vendor stands, and the wind chimes hanging from their awnings ping against one another. I stand up and clutch at myself, instinctively making sure that I am protected from whatever, if anything, is arriving. I'm suddenly very afraid. I'd give nearly anything for Matthew to be beside me right now, but he is, at the moment, in a mass of shapes pushing towards the landing site, hoping for some conclusion to be made real. The spotlights waver as people crowd around them, and the shadows of the giant cacti seem to move, to walk with an unearthly gait, reaching out. They will approach us, and we will recoil from the pain of their embrace. Thank you, thank you. That is a story that's really important to me, and clearly, because I chose it as the title for this book, and it greatly influenced the cover as well, which is a person being abducted into an alien craft. But I really enjoyed Of This World as this sort of thematic story, because often when people use that expression, they say something is not of this world. It is not something we can understand. It is not something that exists, but to call it something of this world is to call it familiar and terrestrial and important to us as humans. And one of the things that I really like about that expression in this context is that this story is about aliens, yes, but it's about people, and aliens may not be of this world, but people are, and they are far more important than aliens could ever be. These connections people have. So the title of that piece is really resonates with me, and it's why I chose it to be the title of this collection, because I think a lot of the stories in this collection speak to relationships more than they do to anything, whether they be romantic or platonic or parent-child or something more ethereal than that. So I thought it fit really well. Uh, I can keep. I have other things I can read if you'd like me to read, or if you'd like, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer those as well.
Read another story. Encore, Benjamin.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Um, I'm gonna read another story from the collection. It's a shorter story. It's called Graft. Uh, I a lot of the things that I write start from facts that I learned, or facts that I learn, uh, that I research very deeply, and sometimes they have relationships to people I know, though not always. Um, the thing that actually inspired that first story that I read of this world, it came from a really unusual place. That story was actually inspired by Kanye West. Uh, my partner and I were talking about it, and we were talking about how detached from his former self he seems now. And we were trying to puzzle out why that might be. And my partner posited that the unexpected death of his mother altered his perception of reality. Um, and I think that there's truth to that. I think that as a person, he took a lot. He cared very deeply about his mother as a presence in his life, and that his mother dying unexpectedly altered the way he viewed the world. Um, and I think that when people think about awful events that happen in the story, it is someone's mother dying, and it seems totally random, and it almost always is random when people die, but it's hard to accept that. Uh, Part of the reason I think conspiracy theorists and alien hunters exist, is because they do want something to blame. It's easy to at an inconsequential level, it's really easy to say for someone to say the pyramids were built by aliens, because it's so hard to imagine that humans could do that. And then at a much more grand level, it's easy to say that something like 9/11 was an inside job, because to do so says that there's someone to blame, and it isn't just the stochastic random nature of like 5 or so people who could cause something like that to happen. And so one of the things that really sent me down to writing that story was the idea that everybody's always going to be looking for something to blame when they encounter something surprising and random, especially if it's grief, and especially if it's horrific, because it's so much easier to point to someone and say, you did this, and not be able to point to anything and say, I don't know how to explain how this happened. And that's what influenced that story, and it influences a lot of the way I think about people who have those ideas and have that kind of thinking. I am always trying to think about what do they want explained, because what they want explained is what they're afraid of. And if for so many of us, that thing they're afraid of is our own mortality and the unknown. And it really influenced me writing that story. I'm gonna read another story that also is kind of about the unknown, and it's about change. A lot of the stories in this book are about change and what it means to be in one state and then be in another state and not really know how you got from place to place. Life being sort of like this black box that you sort of have difficulty navigating through. It's called Graft. This piece originally appeared over at Spartan, which is a wonderful little lit mag about micro and flash. It's called Graft. In knee surgery, doctors frequently replace damaged tissue with cadaver parts. Very little chance of rejection, the orthopedist tells me. He runs a hand up the underside of my leg, stopping for a moment at the shallow depression beneath my knee and pressing into the flesh like he is playing a saxophone. It's this easy. He demonstrates with his pen where the incision will be and then makes a snipping motion with his fingers. That night, I celebrate my 39th birthday. The cake my daughter makes is adorably terrible, and my father-in-law gifts me a coffee mug that says, "Not over the hill, but I'm close," printed on it in block capitals. When everyone is gone, I ask my husband to place it in the Goodwill box. 2 days later, my knee is shaved, and I am rolled into the operating theater, a small, white-tiled room that smells like antiseptic. I half expect to see the leg from the corpse, which will supply my new ligament, propped up against the wall, but of course, there's nothing like that. Anesthetic pumps into my arm through a tube. With my remaining consciousness, I needle the technicians. Is that it? In there? No, that is filled with sterile gauze. Maybe there. In that box, there are spools of suturing nylon. I weakly gesture to a sealed, opaque bag on top of a rolling cart. What about? Then I am back in the recovery room, waking to my husband and daughter watching basketball on television. He explains to her the benefits of a zone defense. Watch the big man, he says. I allow my daughter to sit in the front on the way home so that I may spread my leg out across the back seat. I pull up my sweatpants and scan for evidence of something different, someone new. Daddy says you have a dead person inside you, my daughter says. No, I said Mommy has part of a dead person inside her, he responds. They laugh, some shared joke, causing my husband to not notice a speed bump, which makes the car violently bounce. He apologizes profusely. For the first week, the only thing I notice is pain. My knee swells, and I think that perhaps the other person's tissue is trying to escape. My husband gently places an ice pack over it and then goes back to struggling with a crossword clue. Hitherto unknown. 5 words, starts with A. Alien. It fits, and he makes a satisfied face. I'm glad the ice pack is over my incision. It keeps me from staring. I look at it so frequently that my daughter has noticed. Is that where the dead person is? She points at the bandages, but only for a second, as though she is afraid. What did we say about talking like that? I admonish her and feel a tick of guilt because the dead person inside me is all I can think about. The next week, everything tastes terrible. My favorites, peanut butter, navel oranges, butterfly shrimp, make me gag. In their place, I crave foods I've never enjoyed before, kimchi and grapefruit and pink frosted animal crackers. I make my husband fetch them from the store. What's brought this on? He asks. I tell him I don't know. Pain meds? He posits. Playing with your senses? Maybe, I reply. By week 3, I can't stand my husband anymore. The way he makes the bed, the way he palms my breast during sex, the way he whistles while putting away groceries. I begin to question if I ever liked him to begin with, this man with whom I raise a child. The swelling has gone down considerably, and now I can handle the heavy duvet resting on my bare leg. What I cannot handle are the awful television shows I've set to record. When did I start watching this garbage? And the paint color on the walls? It's hideous, even though I know I chose it myself. I lob aggression at my family over trivial things. I scold my daughter too harshly for scraping the tines of her fork against her plate during dinner, and she runs to her room in tears. My husband responds with a sour look, and I barely have the patience to shoot one back. She's worried, he says, scraping my daughter's cold dinner into the trash. She thinks you were switched out for another person during the operation. That's absurd. He shrugs me off and retrieves my crutches from beside the couch so I can use the restroom. The next day, I return to the hospital for a follow-up appointment. The orthopedist again runs his fingers over my leg, admiring his work. Range of motion is good, he says. You're walking more? Yes, but there is something. I tell him about the changes, how everything feels different, like I restarted a version of my life where nothing at all has carried over except my physical body. It's stressful, he tells me. You're learning things over again. Give it time. He's about to leave when I find the courage to ask, "Can you tell me anything about the donor?" He dismisses the question with a wave. "You don't want to know that. It doesn't matter." Anything? Woman, late 30s, car crash. Really, it's not worth thinking about. He refills my prescription and then walks me to the lobby where I wait for my husband to pick me up. The scar is barely visible now. The crease of my knee joint allows it to blend in like it was always there. I'm nearing 40, perhaps the same age as the woman whose tissue now lives a second life inside of me. We are newly alive in our shared midlife. I hear the familiar sputter of the car and force a smile from my husband. But then, as he gets closer, the smile becomes easier and easier to hold until I can't tell if I'm faking it all.
How you feeling, Benjamin? Do you want to do another one? You good?
Oh, I could go for a while. I'll read one more story. I got a whole book of stories. I'll read another one for sure.
All right, all right.
Um, I'm gonna read something that's a lot more fun, I think. Those stories were kind of downers. Not unimportant downers, but downers. I'm gonna read something more fun. Um, this story uh, came from a prompt I had in grad school. My teacher at the time, Janice Lee, she gave a prompt to my writing workshop that was something along the lines of write an opening line with consequences. Just do an opening line and then that it has consequences. And I tried to think about, I could do really minute consequences, like I left the milk out overnight, or I missed a dentist appointment. But then I thought, what was the most consequential thing I can think of? Um, and I thought about something that, while seeming really benign on the surface, something we say every day, when we think about it, has these like earth-shattering consequences. Not always in a bad way, but in a way this way. I'm going to read the story. It's called House Party. This story was originally published at Hobart, though it's now hosted at Hobart After Dark, or HAD, as it's now called, and you can find it there. This was a story I wrote in grad school, and it was one of the first things I ever published. It's got a special place in my heart as a result, and I remember being very, very ecstatic to see it go up. And I still really, really like the story, and I think it's one of the more fun things I've ever written. This is House Party. We threw a party and everyone came. The night was prime. The moon gleamed in the sky like a fat tooth. Trees only just swayed in warm wind. Traffic sailed by on the 5. I set out plenty of napkins. I tied balloons to the lamppost, the doorknobs. I put the cat in the bedroom and cleared a space for everyone's coats. Emma sat in the brocade chair, crossing and uncrossing her legs, worrying the smooth face of a loose upholstery pin. I queued up Stevie Wonder on the stereo and we waited, Emma getting up every so often to rearrange the snacks. Charlemagne arrived first. Emma and I watched from the window as he marched up our knobby sidewalk, his long fur-lined train dragged through the mush of fallen leaves. We heard the low heel of his leather shoes knock on the deck, and then he barged inside. We made polite, unintelligible conversation. He set his crown on the mantle next to a photo of Emma and I making kissy faces in a photo booth. He then pushed past me and buried his hand in the M&Ms, his dirty, bejeweled fingers clinking against the sides of the bowl. Regret began to pool in my stomach. But then Ellen Wirtz, my 5th grade homeroom teacher, stooped through the doorway, her hunchback brushed by a curtain of white paper streamers. She smiled, and a smudge of lipstick painted itself on her front tooth. She petted my arm and said it looked like I was getting enough to eat, and then fell asleep across the love seat. Emma draped a blanket over her and then changed into flats. After that, they came in waves. My brother and Patty Hurst carpooled. Plato asked where he could park his bike. In the garage, I said, next to George Harrison's skateboard. I shook hands with a wastewater surveyor from Ketchum who was speaking excitedly with Ernest Hemingway. They got along like old friends. Before long, our small ranch style brimmed with dancing, drinking, schmoozing bodies. The party had quickly expanded into the backyard, and guests were squeezed tight around the swimming pool. Linus Pauling stripped to his drawers and executed a flawless jackknife into the deep end. I watched him float, his thin hair like cotton on the water. Please, Emma implored. Use coasters. We spilled out into the street. My mother, rest her soul, sat on the curb and showed a Maasai warrior how to play cat's cradle. She spoke only with her hands. I tried to ask her if she'd seen my sister, if she could tell me what she looked like now, but my voice was drowned out by a drum circle the Navajo Nation had formed on my neighbor's driveway. At times, the rhythmic, thrumming pulse matched up with my heartbeat, and I felt solid and powerful. The party became a street fair, became a parade, became a citywide bash. We ran out of folding chairs. We ran out of bridge mix. Someone spilled something somewhere. I left to smoke in secret and saw my wife as a child at the corner of 4th and Wabash. I pocketed my cigarette and sat beside her, watched as she traced her initials into the mud with a fallen branch. I asked about her favorite subject in school, and she said art, that she hated having to clean up the paints. I could hear in her voice my Emma's familiar cadence, the lilts, the pattern of breathing. I asked if she recognized me. She didn't, but she said that she'd say hi if she saw me around. I said I'd like that. I sat with her a while, drifting off as she doodled in the sludge before she smoothed out her dress, waved, and ran off towards where I remember her parents' house used to be, still was, always is. Shops were silent save the hum of insects. Parliaments lay vacant. Movie theaters and university classrooms housed only empty seats. I walked. I watched Amelia Earhart vomit into Emma's begonias. A slim Tibetan man held back her hair. I kept walking. In our front lawn, Emma twirled in giddy circles, her shoes in a pile near the hose and runs in her stockings. She threw her head back and sweat beaded off her hair and onto the grass.
Oh my God. Everyone, please give it up for Benjamin. That was
Thank you.
It's such a good book. I mean, that's only just like such a small taste of what is in that collection. It's truly astounding.
I appreciate that. Thank
So
you.
folks have not got their copies yet. They absolutely need to do that. So we do have a little bit of time if we want to take some questions for the author. We can do a little Q&A right now. I am actually curious. You talked a little bit about this already, with it being the titular story, but I'm curious about like the overall cover process for you. Like, what was it like working with Frank to try and actually get this? Because it really does. It does such a good job, I think, of embodying like that story and a lot of what you talked about tonight.
One of the things that helps is that I knew Frankie Martin, who designed this cover, from before. When I worked at Portland State University's Department of Undergrad Admissions, he was a graphic designer who I worked with as I was writing content for their website. And he was an amazing graphic designer. He does amazing digital art. He does amazing painting. He does amazing like risograph printing and lithograph art. He really does it all. And right now he mainly does 3D modeling and 3D landscaping and animation for companies like Adidas and Nike, and MTV and all these really wonderful, wonderful places. I had this sort of vision that I wanted for the cover. I really wanted someone to be being taken by this sort of classic, really classic like image of someone being like abducted. And, you know, in a lot of other media, there'd be like a cow up there with them. I went for the cactus because I wanted like an inanimate and an animate kind of thing going on. I also really enjoy how cactuses look like people from afar. In fact, people who often mirage or hallucinate people when out in the forest are seeing cactuses. But I thought about the idea of like helplessness and like this idea of being helplessly taken. Like when you're in the tractor beam, there's no fighting it. If you're in like the Millennium Falcon or something and you have like a jet thruster that can try and push you away, that's something. But if you're out in your fishing boat on the lake, as is in so many episodes of the X-Files or various Simpsons Treehouse of Horrors, it's hard to escape. You're in the tractor beam and you're going to be sucked up and you have no idea what's up there. I'm really interested in the idea of like this black box where you have input, you have it changed somehow, and then you have output, and you really don't know it. And I even like mirror that physically in some of the stories in this book where there is something that someone goes into and then someone comes out of, and this idea that they are very different and changed. And I really like the idea of being like people are beamed up, and when they come back to Earth, a sane person sounds insane suddenly. There's this story that gets told a lot in psychology of this man named Phineas Gage, who in the 1800s was working in a rail yard, and he had a huge piece of metal like flung through his face, and he miraculously survived, but it took part of his brain with him. And people noticed that the Phineas that existed before that accident and the Phineas that existed after were very different people. Um, and it led to psychology sort of like determining or kind of coming to this realization that people can be changed if their brain is changed. That's where like the personality of a person is. That's where you are. And the idea that other things can change you like that, physical experiences or emotional experiences. And it's been proven that emotional experiences can physically alter your brain chemistry. We've obviously seen like people with TBIs are irreversibly changed, but undergoing trauma or grief or even joy to a certain extent can change your brain chemistry and alter who you are. And I thought that the like UFO was a really nice metaphor for that, of being taken sort of against your will, changed, and then placed back on Earth for people to sort of just interact with you in this brand new way. Frankie really took that in a way that I think is incredible. And what he made in this cover is actually a 3D image. So when he wanted to get the back of the spaceship for the back cover, he just turned to the camera
Wow, I didn't know that.
Which I think is incredible. And I really lucked out to have him not only as someone who I think could understand the vision, because I had a really clear vision for what I wanted at the front of the book. He's the one who just suggested 3D, but I had this image in mind from the very beginning of this process. When I put this draft together before I started submitting it, this is like what I wanted the cover to look like, and it came out really well. And I think the title, as I already explained, but also the image is sort of this idea of being changed, whether you like it or not, and that is a lot of what it means to just be alive. That sounds like hokey, but a lot of this book I think is also a metaphor for like the idea of like the change at midlife, and like the idea of like a midlife crisis, and the idea that the person you were as a young person is somehow different than the person you are when you're old, quote unquote. And that's the whole idea of the midlife crisis. So there's other stories in this book that interact with the idea of someone wanting more as they age and wanting to be different and changed. And then there's also stories about people who are forced to change, who change without even knowing it or asking for it. And I think that, I don't know, I've said it once, I've said it a bunch, but I think alien abduction and conspiracy theories in general are a really good like vessel for that kind of thinking.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the inspiration for some of these stories. Actually, Graph really hits home for me because I happen to have a cadaver in as a person. And so I actually went through a little bit of that, like kind of experience of like, oh, I have this part of somebody else in me. This is really weird. What does that mean? And so I am curious, like you've talked a little bit about, like getting influence from conspiracy theories to aliens and stuff like that, but for some of these other inspirations, like how did you get drawn to them? And because in my mind I'm like, you must have experienced this, you know what I mean? Because you write about it so vividly, and so like it's so real and it's so visceral. And so I'm just curious like how you ended up stumbling upon some of these other things as influences or things you wanted to talk about in terms of change.
Yeah, for Graft, I knew someone who tore both their, well, I know someone, my ex tore their ACLs, both of them, in a roller derby accident, and they didn't have anybody take care of them in the moment, and so I re-entered their life to sort of take care of them in this moment, and it was a strange experience because it was as if we were re-entering a life we had previously had, and for just a few days while I was playing caretaker. And then we went our separate ways again. And it made me think that, yes, there's a physical change happening, but I think there's more to it than that. What if there is something more there? And that idea of being like put back into a scenario where you thought you've changed as a person since you've interacted with it is something that I interact with in a couple of these other stories. In the story Illusion, which is about two divorced magicians, a magician couple who are divorced, they have to come back together to perform like one last job. And one person, usually invariably in those situations, wants to fall back into the comfort that existed, and the other person is like, no, we're different people now. It can't be like that. That part's over. um, for a lot of the other inspiration stories, I'm very influenced by um, just images. I'm very interested in having an image in my mind, or seeing an image and arriving at that image somewhere, finding stories that can find their way to that image. The story in this collection that people will probably be most tired of reading in 10 years is called Admonition, and it doesn't say it's about COVID, but I wrote it in 2020, and I wrote it for the Bellevue Literary Review's contest. And it got picked, Joy of Joys, but it meant that I had like a COVID story attached to me forever now. But I was really influenced by this picture that came out of China, where in order to tell people about the virus, they dispatched like people on horseback through blizzards out into the far reaches of Western China to get it. And those images really stuck with me. I'm like, man, China is willing to go to these amazing lengths to reach these people, to tell them about the virus. What are we doing in America? Who are we leaving behind? And we left so many people behind, and continue to leave people behind as we continue to move through the pandemic. People of color, marginalized communities, people who don't live in the traditional confines of like urban society get left behind a lot. And then people who live very deeply in the confines of urban society also get left behind. They're ants from up here to certain people. And so I find a lot of inspiration for stories from images like that. But also one of the things that I find in stories a lot that I'm drawn to is just like loving couples. I think there's a tendency when people start writing to find that drama comes from friction, like plates thrown against the wall and like screaming matches. And I found that I really enjoyed writing stories about people who love each other. And I found that there can be friction in those scenarios. Anybody who's in a long-term relationship knows that you fight all the time about small things. Yeah. Sometimes you fight about big things, and hopefully you find like compromise. But I really enjoyed writing about people who love each other and who like navigate what it means to love one another and change. The people who meet each other at the bar are a different people than they are 30 years later in marriage. They change, and it's about navigating that change together. And so apart from like images, I'm always trying to find stories about people who care about one another, because I think I'm no scholar of literature, like broadly. I know about some things, but I find that there's a lot of literature and art and plays and film and music, especially music, about breaking up. Yep. And how important it feels to have that schism happen. And I'm like, isn't it equally important to write about, when we're loving each other, when we're there for each other, and like the compassion and change that comes through that. And so I find that I write a lot of stories about people who care about one another as much as I write about people who are going through like sort of the opposite scenario. And so I'm also drawn to stories like that, where I see people who, love one another. And I feel like it's not something I see a lot in film and music, especially. Like the breakup album is so much more meaningful to people than the let's stay together, like let's be a happy couple album. Like there's the term wife guy that's come up in the last like however many years, and I like the idea of the wife guy. I've got to say.
Oh my God. No, I love that. I want to turn to the audience. Does anyone in our audience tonight have a question they'd like to throw out for the author? Don't be shy.
No pressure.
No silly questions whatsoever. Bueller, anyone. I also
Hey,
want to give a quick shout out to your display case right now because it actually looks like a tractor beam that is taking up the books, and I think that is perfect for tonight. No, literally, like if you're looking at it right now through the screen, I don't know if people agree with me, but I think it looks right. It's hitting the books just right.
Happy accident.
This is a more silly question that I was thinking, because again, like your stories are just so vivid, and I'm assuming this is more through research, but part of me is like, did you actually go to an alien convention to figure out how to write of this world? Because it's so like to the T, I feel like captures that experience.
I did not go to an alien convention.
Okay.
I'm a research hound. I research every little thing about every story I write for verisimilitude. And a lot of times I fictionalize places so that I can have a little more leeway with things like Unidenticon is not a real thing. Tucson's a real place, but I made up the alien convention. However, I've been to a fair amount of cons in my life. And I think the con that points most closely to an Identicon is I used to play a lot of Magic the Gathering, and I would go to Magic the Gathering Grand Prix, which were like cons, and it was a really similar audience, both in the sense that they don't meet your expectation and they do meet your expectation, but what you're going to see there. And so I know the fatigue that comes, and my partner, when I was doing a lot of that, would come and meet me, and I'd have to be Trexus to them, and I'd be like, "You having fun? You can leave whenever you want. I know this is a lot, but I research really, really heavily everything I write. So some things, like with the house party story, it doesn't require any research because I'm being totally fantastical. But some things, like I wrote a story about magicians, and so I had to research what it means to be a magician and certain things that give it this sort of like reality. And I also did a story about uh, like it's called How to Build a Box, and I had to research. A lot of that comes from my lived experience in Wyoming, but a lot of it is like, what does it actually take to build something, like, and what are the parts that go into it? So I'm very heavily researched. A lot of people write from their life and then they adapt it to stories, like almost in a metafictional sense. I don't really do that very much. Like I completely craft scenarios that I've never been a part of. Like the experiences are true, like the feelings are true, but I've never been to an alien convention, and I've never been a stage magician, and I've never gone and seen a dead body, and I've never had my ACL replaced. So it relies on me doing a lot of research, but also relying on the fact that if the emotions and feelings are true enough, it'll resonate with whoever's reading it.
I
I
love
think Josh, did you have a question?
yeah, I did. I might have to make it quick because the dog needs to go out. But I was curious about putting the collection together, and you've been talking thematically a lot about how the stories are in conversation with each other. But were you working with the idea that everything you were writing was part of a collection from the beginning, or did you put like things together once you got to the point of having enough for a collection?
Great question.
I think when I first started writing short stories in general, like I started writing these short stories maybe in like 2018 or like late 2017. Actually, in fact, 2017, I wrote the baseball story Kestrels in 2017 in a workshop with Christine Scott. And I started writing these stories, and I noticed, just like apropos of nothing, they weren't in a collection at the time, but I noticed that I was using a lot of similar thematic threads to all of them. The main one being change, but also obsession. A lot of these stories deal with people who are obsessed with something and how that obsession changes them. One story I didn't read, but I will be reading in public at some point, and you can find over a diagram, is the story about a person who eats batteries for a month because they're obsessed with the fame that will bring them. There's obsession about alien encounters. Uh, there's obsessions with like safety, and there's obsessions with like who we once were versus who we are. So once I started realizing that a lot of my writing was about obsession and about change, I started sort of like they started sort of collapsing like a star. It started getting denser and denser around this idea of obsession and change, and especially midlife and the idea of like midlife crisis. and it's sort of forming into a collection. Like these all share these really like thematic threads that I really enjoy. And soon I did start writing pieces that revolved around those themes that I thought could sing well together. I didn't necessarily envision them as a collection. I kind of envisioned them as sort of like a body of work that was interacting with things. But then they did coalesce into a collection. So they sort of naturally and organically came together because I was interested in similar themes throughout all of them. And when I think about parsing this book into smaller like chapbooks or something, like I think like there's a huge thing about like stories that really speak to this idea of obsession, this idea of change. And I think that a lot of my writing in general has started to sort of coalesce around that idea of people who find themselves obsessed with a certain idea or goal.
That's awesome. Thank you for
That's
the
cool.
question.
Yeah, really interesting. And I have to run, but thanks so much to both
Yeah,
of you
let
for
that
the
dog
great
out.
event. Yeah, congratulations. Can't wait to
Thank
read
you,
it.
Josh.
Well, I think on that note, I think that's a pretty good place for us to stop for this evening. Honestly, this has just been such a lovely time, and I'm just so proud and honored that you let us put out this book into the world. It's truly such a great collection, and so excited that this is our first short story collection. I couldn't think of a better way
The
for us to
pleasure's
bring
mine.
it.
It felt like it was in very good hands from the get-go. The pleasure is mine for having it out, and I'm excited to read the next short fiction that comes out when you guys publish Tim's book.
Mhm.
I'm super excited to read that, and I know that you have a prose reading period, or recently finished maybe a prose reading period,
It just wrapped up.
and I'm excited to see what comes of that. So yeah, I couldn't be happier with the way the book turned out, and I'm so excited to go and be an evangelist not only for it but of the press and the world. I wanna send people to Game Over because I know the books will get care.
We'll be here for them. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming out tonight. It has been a pleasure. Of This World is available now. Please go get your hands on it if you have not already gotten your copy. And that's it. That's all, folks. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Good night.